Hey everyone, I am so glad you're here today because we're going to talk about something that I think can change our relationships, our small groups, our friendships, and our student ministry as a whole. I promise it's going to be so good. But before we get there, let me tell you a quick story. Have you ever had a bad day, week, or month? When I was younger, I had one of those months, a month where nothing was going the way I wanted. And it sent me into this really awful mood. It was one of those times when you start to reevaluate your whole life. I often found myself asking, what is happening? These days, I look back at the time in my life and I am grateful for what came from the experience. But when I was in it, I was no fun. The once happy, sunshiny Esther was replaced by a drone, and not even the cool kind. For that time in my life, the party definitely did not start with me. In fact, you would not find me anywhere near a party. Maybe you've been there. In fact, maybe you are in it right now. And if you are, I'm sorry. Because the truth is, life is difficult for all of us sometimes. When we kicked off this series, we looked at the promise Jesus made about getting the most out of life. It's a promise that says when we follow him, we can live a full, amazing life. We get that invitation to the greatest party there is. But what about when challenges show up? Life gets difficult and bad days happen. That doesn't feel much like a party, does it? Remember, when we talk about a party in this series, we're talking about an effort to celebrate, serve, love, include, and enjoy being with others in a way that adds value to life. Being a party starter means being someone who does that for others, not just in the good times, but also in the bad. But can I just be real with you for just 1 second? For me, being a party starter for the people in my life is a lot easier to do when things are going great. When a friend makes the winning shot on a game, gets a role in that play, or gets a good grade on a test, that's easy to celebrate. But when they're struggling, when they suffer a loss or deal with something like anxiety or depression, then it's a lot harder to figure out how to be the party starter. It's difficult to know what to do when someone we care about is struggling. Maybe that's because we're not sure what to do or say to help. Maybe that's because we don't really relate to or understand what they're going through. Maybe we feel like what they're dealing with isn't all that big of a deal. Or maybe we just struggle to understand what they're feeling because it's not what we are feeling. But if part of being a party starter means showing up for others no matter what, then we've got to figure out how to do that no matter what challenges they're facing, no matter how they're struggling, no matter if you're unsure how to help, no matter if we understand or not. So how do we do that? So here's the good news. Knowing how to relate to other people in their challenges and suffering isn't a new problem. In fact, as long as people have existed, they've struggled not just with pain, hardship, and difficulties, but with understanding how to help one another through it. Thousands of years ago, people were going through a really difficult time. There was a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of challenges, and a lot of sadness. And this season, a lot of people felt like nobody was there for them, including God. When God's people needed God the most, it felt like God wasn't showing up, wasn't understanding, and wasn't doing much to help. But God always had a plan. And at that time, God's plan was to do something unexpected, to remind people then and us today that in their pain and suffering, God was there. The plan? Well, it was Jesus. If you spend time at church during Christmas season, this part of the story may be familiar to you. In their struggles, the people were waiting for someone to show up. God showed up by sending Jesus. And that's why we celebrate Christmas. Back then, God used prophets to pass on his message to his people. They were like spokespeople for God. They represented God's voice. God spoke through them. And Matthew, one of Jesus' followers, quoted a prophet named Isaiah who said this, "Look, the virgin will conceive a child. She will give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel," which means God with us. So maybe for some of us, this may seem like a familiar verse, but don't miss the meaning here. When there were people struggling, suffering, and looking for someone to help, God sent Jesus to be with them. That's literally what his name means, God with us. It's not God fixes us or God solves our problems or God makes us feel better. Well, that might be what we all want sometimes. It isn't what God sent Jesus to do. God sent Jesus to simply be present, to be with us, to show up when we needed someone the most. And as a party starter, that's what we can do for other people in our lives who needs us too. Think of it this way. A party starter walks with other people in their pain. When our friends are struggling, when the people in our lives are suffering, when our loved ones are experiencing heartbreak, pain, or loss, when we see people around the world in really difficult situations, we don't have to wonder what to do. We can follow God's lead and simply show up. We can be present. We can just be with them. Doing that actually means showing empathy. And empathy means we have the ability to understand and share in what other people are feeling. It's the willingness to just show up and be with someone in the middle of what they're going through. And that's it. We don't have to have all the right words, have the answers to fix the problem, or even be able to relate to what they're facing. All we have to do is show up, and empathy moves us to do that. Now, maybe you're thinking, can showing up really makes that much of a difference? Well, I know it can because it definitely did for me. Okay, let's go back to my story. And I'll be honest, I was depressed. I barely ate, I slept most of the day, and I did not leave my room for almost a month. Some of my friends noticed and called me. I didn't answer. So they called my mom, and my mom was so worried about me that she asked them to come over and help me, shake me up, pull me out of the dark. My friends Ryan and Yanni came to my house. They pulled me out of my house and took me to IHOP. They made me eat and talk. In the beginning, I was reluctant to talk. So we just sat there. But then they started to remember the silly things we used to do, and it made me laugh for the first time in a month. After that, they kept showing up. Yanni would come over to keep me company, and we would try to cook dinner and burn it every single time. Their showing up was the best thing that ever happened to me. I was in such a deep grief and sadness that I was not able to reach out and ask for help. To be honest, I was wallowing in it. I didn't want anyone to pull me out. Also, I didn't think I mattered to anyone. So I desperately needed someone to shake me out of it. My parents tried, but I don't know about you. Sometimes I have selective hearing when it comes to logic and truth coming out of my parents. So I needed someone outside of my family to come along and remind me who I was. And it wasn't that we had a deep philosophical talks about, who we are. We just talk about all the funny, dumb things that we used to do. And I needed someone to make me laugh and do silly things like cook dinner when I knew for a fact that all I was capable of was just burning water. See what I mean? They noticed and cared enough to show up. That's empathy in action. And that's what a party starter does. And that is what I want to challenge all of us to do. First, notice those who are struggling. Open your eyes to what is happening in the lives of those around you. Who's struggling? Who is having a rough time? Who is going through a hard season? Who just seems like they're having a lot of bad days? Pay attention to the people around you who might need a friend right now. Then care about what they're going through. Some of you are naturally empathetic people. You feel what other people are feeling and care a lot about what they're going through. And for others of you, getting into what people are going through just doesn't come naturally. And that's okay. Either way, we can ask God to help us grow in caring about what people around us are going through. We can pray for God to give us a heart that's moved to care when we notice someone suffering. Finally, show up. Okay, this might be a terrible time to bring up confetti, but it's kind of a good metaphor for this last point. When it comes to showing up, if you ever use confetti, then no matter how thoroughly you clean it up, you are bound to keep finding confetti for days, weeks, months after the celebration. And it just keeps showing up. And isn't it true that when you come across even a tiny piece of it lingering in a corner somewhere or under a chair, it can remind you of the celebration that took place in the past? Now, here's my point. Be like confetti. Confetti shows up in the good times. So be that kind of friend consistently. But lingering confetti shows up at unexpected, regular, or even down times too. If you're a friend who celebrates big with people at their biggest, it creates a memory in the friendship. And that investment reminds them that maybe you'll even show up for them at their lowest point too. Confetti has a strange way of reminding us that the heights of the past might mean that there is hope for the future. Showing up is empathy in action. It is not fixing, not dismissing, it's not downplaying, it's just showing up and being with someone who needs us. You can show up physically by hanging out with someone or spending time with them. Or you can show up in other ways, like sending a text, saying a prayer, writing a note, or just being a good friend. The point is to be with someone else in their own pain or grief, to listen to them as they explain their sadness, to simply sit in a silent moment that might feel awkwardly emotional, maybe even to share in someone's tears. There's no perfect way to do this, but choosing to show up when it'd be easier to avoid the emotion, authenticity, or awkwardness of a difficult, sad, or emotional situation is an important step. Showing up can feel incredibly uncomfortable when we're not the ones struggling, but choosing to be present and stay present may mean more to someone else than we'll ever know. That's what God did for us in Jesus, and that's what we can do for others. A party starter walks with other people in their pain. One of the ways that you can walk with other people is in your small group this week. We created small groups to be a place where you can share what you're going through and how you're struggling. But it's also a place where you can show up for the people in your circle when they need it. I hope you'll practice empathy by leaning into supporting others in your group this week. And when you head to your group, think about this question. What is one way I can show up for someone else this week?